Some people live their entire lives in the shadows, not because they want to, but because somewhere along the way they learned it was safer there. This is a story about a woman who had been hiding for over 20 years, until one phone call changed everything. She was 42 years old and worked as a night shift nurse at a children's hospital. While most people were sleeping peacefully in their beds, she was walking through dimly lit hallways, checking on sick children, adjusting IV drips, and offering comfort to worried parents who couldn't sleep. It was a job that demanded everything from her, but she never complained. Taking care of others had become her entire identity. Her days and nights blended together in an endless routine. Wake up in the afternoon, have breakfast while everyone else had dinner, drive to the hospital as the sun went down, and return home as it came up again. She had been doing this for nearly 15 years. Her co-workers knew her as the quiet one, the reliable one, the one who always picked up extra shifts when someone called in sick. But they didn't really know her at all. What they didn't know was that she had a secret tucked away in her heart. She could sing. Not just the casual singing people do in the shower or in their car, but really sing. The kind of voice that could make you stop whatever you were doing and just listen. But she hadn't sung in front of anyone except her family for over 2 decades. The reason went back to when she was 17 years old. Back then, she had been brave enough to sign up for her high school talent show. She had practiced for weeks picking the perfect song, rehearsing every note until it was flawless. On the night of the show, she walked onto that stage with her heart pounding but filled with hope. But teenagers can be cruel. Halfway through her performance, a group of popular kids in the front row started laughing. Not because she was bad, but because she wasn't one of them. She was just the quiet girl who sat in the back of class, not someone they thought deserved to be in the spotlight. Their laughter spread like poison through the audience. She finished the song, but barely. She ran off that stage in tears and swore she would never put herself through that humiliation again, and she kept that promise for 25 years. Her husband had known about her gift, though. He had heard her singing while cooking dinner, humming lullabies to their daughter, and he had always told her that the world needed to hear her voice. But she would just smile and shake her head, the old wounds still too fresh even after all those years. Then her daughter, who was 16 now, decided to take matters into her own hands. Teenagers today are different from previous generations. They grow up with technology at their fingertips, recording everything, sharing everything. One evening, while her mother was at work, the daughter found an old video on her phone. It was from a family gathering where her mother had been convinced to sing after a few glasses of wine. Her voice in that video was stunning, even though it was recorded on a phone with mediocre quality. The daughter knew about a popular talent show that was holding auditions. Without telling anyone, she submitted that video along with an application. She wrote about her mother's story, about how she worked tirelessly helping others but had given up on her own dreams. She clicked submit and hoped for the best. 3 weeks later, the phone rang. When the woman answered, a cheerful voice on the other end introduced herself as a producer from the talent show. They had received her audition tape and were impressed. They wanted her to come to the live auditions in front of the judges and studio audience. Would she be interested? She was confused at first. What audition tape? She hadn't sent anything. Then her daughter confessed what she had done, tears streaming down her face, begging her mother to just try. Just this once. The woman's first instinct was to say no. Absolutely not. The old fear came rushing back like it had never left. But her daughter showed her something that changed her mind. A letter. Her husband had written it before he passed away, knowing his time was limited. In that letter, he wrote about how proud he was of her, how much he loved hearing her sing, and how his biggest regret was that she had let fear steal her gift from the world. He begged her, if she ever got another chance, to be brave. She read that letter 5 times, crying through every word. Her colleagues at the hospital found out about the opportunity and encouraged her too. They organized a little gathering during break time and told her they would all be watching, cheering her on. Even the head nurse, who was usually all business, squeezed her hand and said, "Sometimes we have to do the scary thing." So she called the producer back and said yes. She had no idea what she was getting herself into. She had no fancy performance clothes, no experience with television, no idea how to handle stage lights and cameras. She was just a regular woman who worked night shifts and sang in her kitchen. But she had made a promise to her husband, and she intended to keep it. The weeks leading up to the audition were torture. She would wake up in a panic, convinced she was making a terrible mistake. What if they laughed at her again? What if she froze on stage? What if she embarrassed her daughter and dishonored her husband's memory? The doubts circled in her mind like vultures, but her daughter stayed by her side through it all. She helped her mother practice, recorded her so she could watch herself, and kept reminding her why this mattered. This wasn't about winning a competition or becoming famous. This was about facing an old fear and honoring a promise to someone they both loved deeply. The day before the audition, she requested time off from the hospital. Her co-workers threw her a small surprise party with a cake that said, "Break a leg." She smiled and thanked them, but inside her stomach was doing somersaults. That night she barely slept. She kept thinking about her husband, about that awful night in high school, about everything that could go wrong. When morning came, she put on the simple floral dress her daughter had picked out for her. Nothing fancy, nothing that would make her look like she was trying too hard. Just a regular dress for a regular woman who was about to do something extraordinary. She looked at herself in the mirror and whispered, "I'm doing this for you." The drive to the television studio felt like it took both forever and no time at all. When they arrived and she saw the massive building with security guards and production trucks everywhere, the reality hit her. This was really happening. There was no turning back now. She grabbed her daughter's hand and together, they walked inside to face whatever was coming next. Backstage at a television studio is a world most people never see. It's chaotic and loud, with producers rushing around wearing headsets, contestants practicing their acts in corners, and crew members shouting instructions to each other. The woman stood in the middle of all this chaos, feeling completely out of place. She watched as other contestants prepared. There was a young dance group stretching and running through their choreography. A magician was checking his props for the 100th time. A comedian was pacing back and forth, muttering his jokes under his breath. Everyone seemed to know what they were doing. Everyone except her. A production assistant with a clipboard approached her and smiled warmly. "You're up in about 15 minutes, she said. "How are you feeling?" The woman tried to smile back but could only manage a weak nod. Her hands were shaking so badly that she had to clasp them together to make it stop. The assistant patted her shoulder reassuringly and moved on to the next contestant. Her daughter had been allowed to wait with her until the last possible moment. "Mom, you're going to be amazing," she whispered, squeezing her mother's hand. "Dad is watching over you." "I know he is." The woman wanted to believe that. She wanted to feel her husband's presence giving her strength, but all she felt was overwhelming fear. A voice called out her name. It was time. A stage manager appeared and gestured for her to follow him. She hugged her daughter one last time, taking in the warmth and love, trying to carry it with her like armor. Then she followed the stage manager down a dark corridor toward the stage entrance. She could hear the muffled sounds of the audience on the other side of the curtain, their voices blending together into an indistinct roar. The stage manager stopped at the entrance and spoke into his headset. "We're ready with the next contestant." He turned to her and said, "When you hear your name announced, just walk straight out to the center mark. You'll see it on the floor. The host will talk to you first, then you'll sing. Just remember to breathe and enjoy the moment. Enjoy the moment." That seemed impossible right now. She heard the host's voice boom through the speakers. He was talking about her, though she could barely process the words through the fog of her anxiety. Then she heard her name and the audience applauded politely. The stage manager gave her a gentle push forward, and suddenly she was walking out onto the stage. The lights hit her first. Bright, hot, almost blinding. She squinted slightly, trying to adjust. As her eyes adapted, she saw the massive audience spreading out in front of her in tiered rows. Hundreds of people, maybe thousands, all looking at her. The three judges sat at their table directly in front of the stage, looking up at her with neutral expressions, waiting to be impressed. She kept walking toward the center mark, her legs feeling like they might give out at any moment. And then she heard it. Quiet at first, but growing. Laughter. Not loud, cruel laughter like in high school, but the kind of polite, dismissive chuckling that's somehow worse. She could see people in the audience exchanging glances, their expressions saying what their mouths wouldn't. "Really? This is what we're about to watch?" She knew what they were thinking. She could see it written on their faces. She wasn't young and energetic like most contestants. She wasn't dressed in anything eye-catching or glamorous. She looked like someone who had just come from running errands, not someone about to deliver a show-stopping performance. She looked ordinary, forgettable, not star material. One of the judges, a woman known for her tough critiques, leaned over to whisper something to the judge next to her. They both smiled slightly. Not meanly, but not encouragingly either. It was the smile people give when they're trying to be polite while thinking, this is probably going to be awkward. The host approached her with his microphone and his television-ready smile. Welcome. It's so great to have you here. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What do you do? His voice was friendly enough, but there was that edge of performance to it, the way talk show hosts speak when they're trying to keep things moving. She leaned toward the microphone he held out. Her voice came out smaller than she intended, shaky and uncertain. I'm a nurse. I work the night shift at a children's hospital. Her accent was plain, her words simple. Nothing about her screamed star quality. The host nodded enthusiastically, doing his job. That's wonderful. Healthcare workers are heroes. What made you decide to audition for the show? This was it. This was where she had to explain herself to this room full of strangers, to the judges, to the millions of people who would eventually watch this on television. She took a breath, and the words came out in a rush. I didn't actually audition. My daughter sent in a video without telling me. The audience laughed again, this time more openly. They thought it was cute, funny even. The judges smiled more genuinely now, charmed by the story. But she could still feel their doubt. Mothers whose daughters sign them up for talent shows rarely turn out to be genuinely talented. It makes for a sweet story, but not usually for great television. The host's eyebrows raised. Your daughter signed you up? That's quite a story. And you decided to go through with it? She nodded, still feeling like she might pass out at any moment. Why? What made you say yes? This was the hard part, the part where she had to talk about him. My husband passed away 6 months ago. The laughter in the audience stopped instantly, replaced by a collective intake of breath. The judges' expressions changed, their smiles fading into something more serious, more respectful. She continued, her voice steadier now, fueled by the need to explain, to make them understand. Before he died, he wrote me a letter. He always wanted me to sing publicly, but I was too scared. I had a bad experience when I was younger, and I gave up. But in his letter, he asked me to try, to be brave. So I'm here because I made him a promise. The studio had gone completely quiet now. Even the crew members who had been moving around in the shadows had stopped to listen. The woman standing on that stage wasn't just another contestant anymore. She was someone's widow, someone's mother, someone trying to keep a promise to a person they loved and lost. One of the judges, a man known for rarely showing emotion, nodded slowly. His expression had completely changed. The polite skepticism was gone, replaced with genuine interest and respect. The other judges leaned forward slightly, giving her their full attention now. The host's voice was gentler when he spoke again. That's incredibly brave of you. And what are you going to sing for us today? She told him the song title. It was a classic ballad, the kind that had been sung at weddings and anniversaries for decades. It was our wedding song, she added quietly. The host placed a hand over his heart, a gesture that might have seemed fake with anyone else but felt genuine in this moment. Well, we're honored that you're here and that you're sharing this with us. Whenever you're ready, the stage is yours. He walked off to the side, leaving her alone at the center of the stage. The audience was completely silent now. Not a cough, not a whisper. They were waiting. The judges were waiting. Somewhere backstage, her daughter was waiting, probably crying already, knowing what was about to happen. She looked out at all those faces, all those strangers who had been laughing at her just minutes ago, and she felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't about them. This wasn't even really about the competition. This was about keeping a promise. This was about finally, after 25 years, refusing to let fear win. The music began to play softly through the speakers. She closed her eyes, and in that darkness, she wasn't standing on a stage in front of thousands of people anymore. She was in her living room, her husband's arms around her, their wedding day playing in her memory like a movie. She could almost feel him there, encouraging her, believing in her the way he always had. The fear didn't disappear, but it became smaller, manageable. She opened her mouth and everything changed. Before that first note even left her lips, the woman standing on that stage had already traveled through 20 years of memories in the span of a heartbeat. The song she was about to sing wasn't just a collection of lyrics and melody. It was her whole life compressed into 3.5 minutes. She remembered the day she met him. She had been working at a small diner, saving money for nursing school. He had come in during the lunch rush, a construction worker with dusty boots and kind eyes. He ordered coffee and a sandwich and left her a generous tip. But more than that, he left her a napkin with a terrible joke written on it and a phone number. She had laughed at the joke despite herself and called the number the next day. Their first date had been simple. A movie and ice cream afterward. He made her laugh constantly. But he also listened when she talked about her dreams, her fears, her past. When she finally told him about the high school talent show incident, about how those kids had broken something inside her, he had taken her hand and said, "They were fools. Anyone who makes fun of someone trying their best is just showing their own insecurity." He proposed to her on a Tuesday evening. Nothing fancy, no elaborate plan. They had been walking through a park after she finished a particularly difficult shift at the hospital where she was training. He stopped by a bench, got down on one knee and said, "I don't have much to offer except a lifetime of bad jokes and unconditional love. Will you marry me?" She had said yes before he even finished the question. Their wedding had been small. Family and close friends gathered in a community center decorated with flowers from a local grocery store. They couldn't afford a fancy venue or an expensive reception. But none of that mattered when they had their first dance as husband and wife, to the very song she was about to sing now. As they swayed together, he had whispered in her ear, "One day the whole world is going to hear how beautiful your voice is." They had built a life together. Not a perfect life, but a real one. There were bills to pay and arguments about money. There were stressful nights when their daughter was sick and they took turns staying up with her. There were moments of doubt and frustration, but there was also laughter. So much laughter. He never stopped telling those terrible jokes. She never stopped rolling her eyes at them while secretly loving every single one. He supported her through nursing school, even when it meant he had to work overtime to cover their expenses. He took care of their daughter on nights when she had to study or work late shifts. He was her biggest cheerleader, always believing she could do anything she set her mind to, except for one thing. He could never quite convince her to sing in public again. That wound was too deep, that fear too strong. Then came the diagnosis. A routine checkup revealed something wrong with his heart. The doctors used terms like cardiomyopathy and progressive and treatment options, but what they really meant was that time was running out. He took the news better than she did. While she fell apart, he stayed calm. "We've had a good life," he told her. "I'm not done yet, so let's make the most of whatever time we have." And they did. They took their daughter to the beach even though he got tired easily. They had movie nights every weekend. They talked about everything and nothing, storing up memories like treasures. But as his condition worsened, he also started preparing. He wanted to make sure his family would be okay when he was gone. That's when he wrote the letters. One for their daughter to be opened on her 18th birthday, and one for his wife to be opened immediately. He sealed them in envelopes and gave them to his sister for safekeeping. 3 weeks later, his heart gave out. He died in the hospital, the same place where his wife had spent so many years caring for others. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The funeral was a blur. People came and offered condolences. They brought casseroles and said things like, "He's in a better place and time heals all wounds." She nodded and thanked them, but inside she was screaming. How could any place be better than here with his family? How could time heal a wound this deep? After everyone left, her sister-in-law approached her with the envelope. "He wanted you to have this now," she said gently. The woman had taken it upstairs to her bedroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the bed she had shared with her husband for 20 years. Her hands shook as she opened it. The letter was written in his messy handwriting, the same handwriting she'd seen on grocery lists and birthday cards and love notes stuck to the bathroom mirror. Reading it felt like hearing his voice one last time. He wrote about how much he loved her, how proud he was of the mother she had become, how grateful he was for every day they had together. And then, in the last paragraph, he wrote about her voice. He wrote about how hearing her sing while cooking dinner was one of his favorite sounds in the world. He wrote about how she had let one bad experience steal something beautiful from her, and how he had always hoped she would find the courage to reclaim it. "If you ever get another chance," he wrote, "please take it. Not for me, not for anyone else, but for yourself. Promise me you won't let fear win. You have a gift and the world deserves to hear it." She had read that letter dozens of times in the 6 months since his death. She kept it in her nightstand drawer and took it out whenever she felt like she couldn't go on. It became her anchor, her reminder that love doesn't end just because someone dies. And when her daughter submitted that audition video and she got the call from the show, she read the letter again and knew what she had to do. Standing on that stage now, under those blinding lights, facing those doubting faces, she carried all of that with her. Every memory, every laugh, every tear, every word from that letter. This wasn't just about singing a song. This was about honoring a love that had shaped her entire adult life. This was about being brave enough to keep a promise to a man who had believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. The host had asked her why this song, and she had given a simple answer. It was our wedding song. But the truth was so much bigger than that. This song was their first dance. It was the lullaby she had sung to their daughter, the same melody her husband had hummed while fixing things around the house. It was the soundtrack to their entire relationship. Every note carried a memory. Every word held a piece of her heart. As the opening notes of the music filled the auditorium, she thought about that last conversation they'd had in the hospital. He had been weak, struggling to breathe, but he had smiled at her and said, "Remember when we danced to this at our wedding? You were so beautiful that day. You still are." She had held his hand and whispered back, "I should have sung for you more. I should have been braver. You still can be," he had said, his voice barely above a whisper. It's never too late to be brave. She realized now, standing alone on this massive stage, that he was right. It wasn't too late. She was 42 years old, a widow, a working mother, someone who had spent decades hiding her gift because teenagers had been cruel one night. But today, in this moment, she was choosing something different. She was choosing to honor his memory by doing the thing that scared her most. She was choosing to let fear lose and love win. The audience was watching her, waiting. Some still skeptical, some now curious after hearing her story. The judges had their pens ready to take notes, their faces showing varying degrees of interest and compassion. Somewhere in the wings, her daughter was probably praying, and somewhere beyond all of this, she believed her husband was watching too. She took one more deep breath. This one was for him, and then she began to sing. The first note that came from her lips seemed to hang in the air for a moment, as if even the sound itself was surprised by its own beauty. It started soft, almost tentative, but it carried a richness that immediately cut through the massive auditorium like a beam of light through darkness. In the audience, people who had been settling into their seats, maybe checking their phones or whispering to their neighbors, suddenly stopped everything, heads turned, eyes focused. That first note had done something that words couldn't do. It had commanded attention without asking for it. The judges' reactions were immediate and visible. The woman judge who had been whispering and smiling skeptically just moments ago sat up straighter. Her pen, which she had been holding loosely ready to jot down polite criticism, now hung motionless in her hand. The male judge beside her, known for his stone-faced expressions during mediocre performances, raised his eyebrows. The third judge, sitting at the end of the table, actually leaned forward, as if getting physically closer would help him understand what he was hearing. But the woman on stage wasn't seeing any of this. Her eyes were closed. She had transported herself somewhere else entirely. In her mind, she wasn't in a television studio at all. She was back in her living room on a Sunday morning. Her husband was making pancakes in the kitchen, badly as always, filling the house with the smell of slightly burned batter. Their daughter was still asleep upstairs, and she was singing this song while folding laundry, not performing for anyone, just filling their home with music the way she did when no one important was watching. Except someone important had always been watching. Her husband would stop whatever he was doing when she sang. He would lean against the doorframe and just listen, a smile spreading across his face. "There it is," he would say afterward. "That's the voice I fell in love with." As she moved into the second line of the song, her voice grew stronger. The tentative quality melted away, replaced by confidence that comes not from arrogance but from honesty. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to hit impressive high notes or show off technical skill. She was simply telling a story through song, and the story happened to be her own. The audience was completely still now. That restless energy that always fills a crowd had vanished. People sat frozen in their seats, many with their mouths slightly open. A man in the 10th row had been recording on his phone, but he slowly lowered it, realizing that this was a moment that needed to be experienced, not just captured. What made her performance so stunning wasn't just the quality of her voice, though that alone would have been enough. It was the raw emotion that infused every word. Years of love, loss, regret, and hope poured out with each note. This wasn't a performance. It was a confession, a prayer, a love letter sung out loud in a room full of strangers. A woman sitting in the third row who had come to the show expecting to be entertained felt tears start to form in her eyes. She didn't even know why at first. The song was touching her somewhere deeper than the melody, somewhere in that place where we store our own losses and loves. She thought about her own parents, about time passing, about chances not taken. The nurse on stage was singing about her husband, but somehow she was singing for everyone who had ever loved and lost. The judges were having a similar experience. The female judge had completely forgotten about taking notes. She was watching the performance with an intensity that went beyond professional evaluation. She had judged thousands of acts over the years. She had seen incredible singers, amazing dancers, acts that defied belief. But this was different. This was someone bearing their soul, and it was impossible not to be moved by that kind of vulnerability. Back on stage, the woman reached the first chorus. This was where the song swelled, where the melody climbed and the emotions intensified. Her voice rose with it, effortlessly hitting notes that many trained singers would struggle to reach. But it wasn't just about hitting the notes. It was about what she did with them. Each one was filled with meaning, with memory, with love. And then something unexpected happened. Her voice cracked slightly, just for a moment, on one particular word. It wasn't a technical error in the traditional sense. It was emotion breaking through. It was the reality of her grief finding its way into the music. For a split second, she was no longer a performer singing a song. She was a widow remembering her husband. And the pain was too real to hide behind perfect technique. In any other performance, a crack in the voice might be seen as a mistake. Judges would mark it down. Audiences might wince. But in this moment, that slight imperfection made everything more powerful. It proved that this was real. This wasn't rehearsed emotion or manufactured drama. This was a human being standing on a stage, keeping a promise to someone she loved, and dealing with grief that was still fresh and raw. The male judge, who prided himself on being tough and objective, felt something strange happening. His eyes were burning. He blinked rapidly, trying to maintain his composure. He had a reputation to uphold. He was the judge who told people hard truths, who didn't sugarcoat criticism, who kept the show's standards high. But right now, watching this ordinary woman do something extraordinary, he was struggling to keep his professional distance. The woman continued singing, tears now flowing freely down her face. But she didn't stop. She didn't let the emotion overcome her completely. Instead, she channeled it into the performance, letting it fuel the music rather than destroy it. Her voice remained strong and clear even as tears streamed down her cheeks. It was a display of strength that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with courage. In the wings of the stage, her daughter stood with her hands clasped in front of her face, watching through her fingers like someone watching a scary movie. But these weren't tears of fear. They were tears of pride and grief mixed together. She was watching her mother do something she had never imagined possible. She was seeing her mom not just as a parent or a nurse or a widow, but as a complete person with gifts and dreams and the bravery to pursue them, despite overwhelming fear. The production crew, who had seen countless auditions and usually remained detached and professional, found themselves caught up in the moment too. A cameraman who had been focused on getting the perfect shot realized he was crying behind his viewfinder. He had to blink away tears to keep his vision clear. A sound engineer listening through her headphones was grateful that no one could see her face right now. Even the stage manager, who had shepherded hundreds of nervous contestants onto this stage, stood watching with his arms crossed, unable to look away. As the second verse unfolded, the woman's voice seemed to grow even more powerful. Not louder, but deeper somehow. More present. She was fully inhabiting every word, every note. When she sang about memories, you could hear the weight of actual memories. When she sang about love, you could feel the real love that had shaped her life. When she sang about loss, the grief was so palpable that it spread through the room like a wave. People in the audience who had never experienced loss like hers found themselves thinking about their own lives, about the people they loved, about the things they had left unsaid or undone, about the fears that had kept them from being brave. The nurse on stage wasn't just singing anymore. She was holding up a mirror, and everyone watching was seeing themselves reflected in it. The third judge, who had judged this show for over a decade, found herself thinking something she had never thought before. This isn't about the competition. This transcends the show. This is about something bigger than any of us. She glanced at her fellow judges and could see they were thinking the same thing. This wasn't the kind of performance you scored or evaluated. This was the kind of moment you just witnessed and felt grateful to have been present for. The woman on stage opened her eyes briefly, just for a moment. She saw the sea of faces watching her, but instead of the mockery she had feared, instead of the judgment she had expected, she saw something else entirely. She saw people crying. She saw people leaning forward in their seats completely absorbed. She saw the judges watching her with expressions of awe and respect, and for the first time in 25 years, standing on a stage in front of thousands of people, she didn't feel afraid. She felt powerful. She felt seen. She felt like maybe, just maybe, her husband had been right all along. As the song reached its emotional peak, something extraordinary began to happen in that auditorium. What started as one woman's personal moment of grief and courage transformed into a collective experience that no one present would ever forget. The woman on stage had reached the final chorus, the part of the song where everything builds to its highest point. Her voice soared through the space, filled with every ounce of emotion she had been carrying for the past 6 months. The pain of loss, the beauty of memory, the weight of a promise kept. It was all there in her voice, impossible to separate, impossible to ignore, and the tears that had been streaming down her face never stopped her from singing. If anything, they made her voice even more powerful, more real. In the third row, the woman who had first started crying was now sobbing openly. She had given up trying to hide it or control it. She didn't even fully understand why this performance was affecting her so deeply. Maybe it was the authenticity. Maybe it was because we all carry grief in some form, and seeing someone else express theirs so honestly gives us permission to feel our own. Her husband, sitting next to her, put his arm around her shoulders and found that his own eyes were wet too. He thought about his own father, gone for 5 years now, and how he wished he had told him more often how much he loved him. The emotional response was spreading through the audience like ripples on water. One person's tears seemed to trigger the next person's and then the next. It wasn't organized or planned. It was simply human beings responding to something deeply human. A man in the back row who had come to the show thinking it would be fun entertainment found himself thinking about his wife at home. They had been married for 30 years, and somewhere along the way he had stopped telling her all the things he used to say when they were young. This song, this performance was reminding him that life is short and love is precious. A teenage girl sitting with her mother had tears rolling down her cheeks. She was thinking about her grandmother, who had passed away the year before. Her grandmother had always encouraged her to pursue her dreams, to not let fear hold her back. Watching this woman on stage, who was probably around her grandmother's age, keeping a promise despite her terror, felt like receiving a message from beyond. Be brave, don't wait. Life is too short for regret. The judges were no longer trying to maintain any professional composure. The female judge had tears streaming down her face, her makeup starting to run. She didn't care. She had given up on trying to hide what she was feeling. In all her years of judging through countless performances and endless auditions, she had never been so moved. She glanced at her notebook where she was supposed to be taking notes and realized she hadn't written a single word. There were no words for this. The male judge, the one known for being tough and unemotional, had removed his glasses. His hands were shaking slightly as he wiped his eyes. He was thinking about his own family, about the times he had been too busy or too focused on work to really be present. He was thinking about how quickly life can change, how suddenly someone you love can be gone. The woman on stage wasn't just singing about her loss. She was reminding everyone watching that love and time are the only things that truly matter. Even the third judge, who had maintained a slightly better composure than the others, had visible tears in his eyes. He kept his hands folded on the table in front of him, but his expression had transformed completely from the polite skepticism of 10 minutes ago. He was watching this woman with something close to reverence. Backstage, the woman's daughter had collapsed into a chair, her face buried in her hands, her whole body shaking with sobs. These were complicated tears. She was crying for her father, who would never see this moment. She was crying with pride for her mother, who was being so incredibly brave. She was crying because watching her mom keep that promise was like having her dad there with them again. His love manifested through courage and song. A production assistant stood nearby, unsure whether to comfort her or give her space, tears running down her own face in sympathy. The production crew, usually invisible in the shadows, were all affected too. The cameraman who had been crying earlier was still trying to keep his hands steady, but it was difficult. He had filmed thousands of hours of television, seen every kind of human emotion, but this was different. Through his lens, he could see every tear on the woman's face, every moment of pain and strength, and it was impossible not to be moved by it. The sound engineer, responsible for making sure every note was captured perfectly, found herself grateful for the technical work, because it gave her something to focus on besides her own emotions. But even the levels and frequencies on her monitor seemed to reflect the power of what was happening. This wasn't just sound. This was a human soul expressing itself through music. A makeup artist standing in the wings, ready to help contestants look their best before going on stage, was crying so hard she had to lean against the wall. She thought about her own mother, still alive but getting older every day. When was the last time she had really told her mom how much she meant to her? When was the last time she had really listened? Really been present? This performance was asking questions that everyone in the room was suddenly forced to answer. The host of the show, usually focused on keeping things moving and entertaining, stood off to the side with his arms crossed, his professional smile completely gone. He was just a person watching something profound unfold. In his many years hosting the show, he had seen incredibly talented people. But talent alone didn't usually make people cry. This was different. This was about the human spirit, about love that survives death, about courage in the face of fear. Back in the audience, an elderly man sat with tears running into his white beard. He was thinking about his wife of 50 years, gone now for 2. He still slept on his side of their bed, still set 2 plates out before remembering, still turned to tell her something before the reality crashed back over him. Watching this woman sing about love and loss, he didn't feel quite so alone in his grief. Somehow this stranger on stage understood. She was living the same reality he woke up to every morning. A young woman in her 20s, who had come to the show with friends expecting to laugh and be entertained, found herself crying for reasons she couldn't quite articulate. She hadn't experienced loss like this. Her life had been relatively easy, but something about this performance was breaking her heart anyway. Maybe it was the recognition that loss was coming, that everyone she loved would someday be gone, or she would be gone from them. Maybe it was the realization that love, real love, comes with the price of eventual grief. And somehow this woman on stage was showing that the price was worth paying. The song was nearing its end now, the final notes approaching. But the woman didn't let up. If anything, she seemed to sing even harder, to pour even more of herself into these last moments. Her voice, still strong despite the tears, still clear despite the emotion, filled every corner of that massive space. People sitting in the highest rows of the balcony could hear every word, could feel every feeling. The acoustics of the building were good, but this went beyond acoustics. This was about the power of genuine emotion to reach people no matter where they were sitting. The final note came. She held it, her voice unwavering, letting it ring out through the auditorium. It seemed to last forever, that note. It seemed to carry every memory she had of her husband, every moment of their 20 years together, every word from his letter, every tear she had cried since losing him. And then slowly she let it fade. The music ended, and for a long moment there was absolute silence. It wasn't the uncomfortable silence of a failed performance. It wasn't the confused silence of an audience unsure how to react. It was the sacred silence that follows something profound. The silence of people needing a moment to process what they had just witnessed. The silence of a room full of people who had just been changed in some small but significant way. The woman on stage opened her eyes fully now. Her face was wet with tears, her makeup smeared, her simple dress wrinkled from her nervous hands gripping the fabric. She looked exhausted and relieved and vulnerable and strong all at once. She looked, in that moment, like every person who has ever faced their greatest fear and survived it. She looked like courage in human form. And then, as if released from a spell, the audience began to move. The silence lasted only a heartbeat, but it felt like an eternity. And then, as if the entire audience had been holding its breath and finally let it go, the sound began. It started with one person. A man in the fifth row simply stood up. He didn't plan it. He didn't think about it. His body just responded to what his heart was feeling, and he rose to his feet. And then the person next to him stood. And then the person behind them. Like a wave moving through the ocean, the entire audience began to rise. Within seconds, every single person in that auditorium was standing. From the front row all the way to the back, from the floor seats to the highest balcony, hundreds and hundreds of people on their feet. And then came the applause. It wasn't polite applause. It wasn't the kind of clapping you do because you're supposed to. This was thunderous. It was the sound of hundreds of hands coming together with force, with meaning, with emotion. The sound filled the entire space, bouncing off the walls, growing, louder and louder until it became almost overwhelming. Mixed in with the applause were cheers, shouts of encouragement, and the unmistakable sound of people crying while trying to clap at the same time. The woman on stage looked stunned. She had been prepared for rejection. She had been ready for polite acknowledgement at best. But this was beyond anything she could have imagined. Her hands came up to her face, covering her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. Fresh tears poured down her cheeks, but these were different tears. These weren't just tears of grief anymore. These were tears of release, of validation, of pure, overwhelming emotion. She looked out at all those standing people, all those crying faces, all that genuine response to what she had just shared, and something inside her shifted. For 25 years she had carried the shame of that high school talent show. She had believed those laughing teenagers. She had internalized their mockery and let it define her. But now, standing here, seeing hundreds of people moved to tears by her voice, that old wound was finally starting to heal. The judges were standing too, though they had to stand behind their table. All three of them were clapping hard, their hands raised high. The female judge had given up on her makeup entirely. Mascara streaked down her face, and she didn't care one bit. She was clapping and crying and shaking her head in amazement. The male judge, still without his glasses, was clapping with his eyes closed, his face showing everything he was feeling. The third judge was whistling through his fingers, something he never did, adding to the cacophony of appreciation filling the room. The applause went on and on. 1 minute, 2 minutes. People in the audience didn't want to stop. Stopping felt like letting go of the moment, like breaking the spell. A woman in the crowd shouted, "You're amazing!" Others joined in with their own encouragements. "Beautiful. Thank you. We love you." Random voices calling out from different parts of the auditorium, all saying essentially the same thing. "You moved us. You changed us. What you just did mattered." The host, who was supposed to keep the show moving on schedule, made no move to stop the ovation. He was clapping too, standing off to the side, letting this moment be what it needed to be. He had enough experience to know that some things are more important than staying on schedule. This was one of those things. The producers in the control booth, usually quick to give instructions through the host's earpiece about timing, remained silent. They were watching their monitors, seeing the audience response, seeing the woman on stage overcome with emotion, and they understood. This wasn't just good television. This was something genuine and rare. In the wings, her daughter had emerged from the chair where she had been sobbing. She stood now at the edge of the stage, visible to her mother, clapping so hard her hands hurt. She was crying and laughing at the same time, proud beyond words, grateful beyond measure. She thought about her father and knew, somehow knew, that he was watching this, that he was just as proud, that he was saying, "I told you so," with that gentle smile he always had when he was right about something important. The production crew had abandoned all pretense of professional detachment. The cameras kept rolling, because that was their job, but the operators were crying. The boom microphone operator was crying. The lighting director up in the booth was crying. A grown man, 30 years in the business, wiping his eyes with his sleeve and not caring who saw. This was the moment people got into television for. Not for the spectacle or the drama, but for these rare instances when something real breaks through all the production and polish. The applause continued. 3 minutes now. The woman on stage had lowered her hands from her face, but she was still crying, still looking overwhelmed. She tried to mouth thank you to the audience, but her face kept crumpling with emotion. She would get control of herself for a second, try to compose herself, and then another wave of feeling would wash over her. It was too much, too big, too real. An elderly couple in the audience was holding each other while they clapped, both crying, both thinking about their own decades together. A group of college students who had come expecting entertainment were standing with tears on their young faces, understanding for perhaps the first time what real courage looked like. A father holding his small daughter on his shoulders clapped with one hand while steadying her with the other, thinking about how he would tell her about this moment when she was old enough to understand it. The standing ovation was becoming something more than appreciation for a good performance. It was becoming a shared experience of catharsis. Everyone in that room had brought their own stories of loss and love. Everyone had their own fears and regrets. And for these few minutes, all of it was acknowledged. The woman on stage hadn't just sung about her grief. She had created a space where everyone's grief was valid, where everyone's love mattered, where everyone's courage was recognized. Finally, after nearly 4 minutes of continuous applause, the host began to move toward the center of the stage. He was still clapping as he walked, and his approach seemed to signal to the audience that it was time to let the woman catch her breath. The applause began to soften, though people were still standing, still moved. The host reached the woman and put a gentle hand on her shoulder, his own eyes red, his voice thick with emotion when he finally spoke into his microphone. "I think," he began, then had to stop and clear his throat. "I think we can all agree that we just witnessed something very special." The audience erupted again briefly, agreeing enthusiastically. He waited for them to quiet down again. "Please, everyone can have a seat. Let's hear what our judges have to say." People began to sit reluctantly, like they didn't want to let go of the moment. The woman on stage looked toward the judges' table with an expression of vulnerability and hope. She had done what she came to do. She had kept her promise. But now she had to face their judgment, and suddenly the fear crept back in. What if they had technical criticisms? What if they pointed out the moment her voice cracked? What if the emotion had been too much? The judges were conferring quietly among themselves, though conferring might be too strong a word. They were just looking at each other with expressions that said, "How do we even put this into words?" They had to evaluate this performance, had to say something meaningful, had to somehow capture what had just happened in this room. It was an impossible task. The female judge reached for her microphone first. Her hand was shaking slightly. She looked at the woman on stage, took a breath, and began to speak. But her voice broke almost immediately, and she had to stop. She laughed at herself a little, embarrassed, and tried again. The audience waited patiently. They understood. How could anyone find words for what they had just experienced? And in that moment, standing on that stage, still shaking from the adrenaline and emotion, still processing the fact that hundreds of people had just given her a standing ovation, the woman realized something important. She had spent 25 years believing she wasn't good enough. She had let one bad experience convince her that her gift didn't matter, that she didn't deserve to be heard. But this moment was proving something her husband had always known. Her voice did matter. Her courage did matter. She mattered. The judges were about to speak, about to tell her what they thought. But in a way, it didn't matter anymore what they said. She had already won something far more valuable than a competition. She had faced her greatest fear. She had kept a promise to someone she loved. And she had discovered that on the other side of fear, after you push through it despite the terror, there's something beautiful waiting. There's freedom. There's healing. There's the person you were always meant to be. The female judge finally managed to compose herself enough to speak. She held the microphone close and looked directly at the woman on stage with an intensity that made it clear this wasn't going to be a typical critique. Her voice was still thick with emotion, but steady now. "I need to start by saying something," she began. "I've been judging this show for 15 years. 15 years of watching talented people from all over the country come onto this stage. I've seen incredible dancers, amazing singers, unbelievable acts of all kinds. I thought I had seen everything." She paused, her eyes filling with tears again. But I have never in all those years been so completely moved by a performance. What you just did up there wasn't just singing. I don't even know what to call it. The audience murmured their agreement, many still wiping their own eyes. The judge continued. When you first walked out here, I'll be honest, I didn't know what to expect. You seemed nervous. You looked like, forgive me for saying this, but you looked like someone who might have wandered onto the stage by accident. A few people in the audience laughed gently at this, including the woman on stage who nodded in acknowledgement. But the moment you opened your mouth, everything changed. The judge leaned forward, her expression intense. Your technical skill is exceptional. Your voice is powerful and controlled and beautiful. But that's not what made everyone in this room cry. It's not what made me cry. She pressed her hand to her chest. It was your heart. It was your courage. It was the fact that we could all feel your love for your husband in every single note. You weren't performing for us. You were honoring him. And that authenticity, that vulnerability is something that cannot be taught. It cannot be faked. She had to stop again, her voice breaking. I'm a mother. I have a daughter your daughter's age. And watching you up there, keeping that promise despite being so scared, teaching your daughter what real bravery looks like. She couldn't finish the sentence. She just shook her head and said, thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. The audience applauded again, and the judge sat back in her chair, clearly emotionally exhausted. The male judge picked up his microphone next. He had put his glasses back on, but his eyes were still visibly red behind them. He was known throughout the show's history as the toughest judge, the one who gave the harshest criticism, the one who didn't let sentiment get in the way of honest evaluation. Everyone was curious about what he would say. He looked at the woman for a long moment before speaking. When he finally did, his voice was different from his usual confident, sometimes harsh tone. It was softer, more human. I pride myself on being objective, he said. I believe this show needs someone who can give honest feedback, even when it's difficult to hear. I don't usually let emotion cloud my judgment. He paused. But what you just did made that impossible. I couldn't be objective about that performance if I tried, and I don't want to try. He set his microphone down for a moment and rubbed his face with both hands, taking a moment to collect himself. The audience waited in respectful silence. When he picked up the microphone again, his voice was even more raw. My father died 3 years ago, he said, and there was an audible reaction from the audience. He rarely shared personal information. We had a complicated relationship. There were things I never said to him, things I wish I had. And watching you up there singing that song for your husband, keeping that promise, he had to stop and breathe. You're teaching me something. You're teaching all of us something about love and courage and not waiting until it's too late. He looked down at the table, then back up at her. That crack in your voice, that moment where the emotion broke through, some people might call that a technical flaw. I'm telling you right now, that was the most perfect moment I've ever heard in music, because it was real. It was human. It reminded everyone watching that we're not here to see perfection. We're here to see truth, and you gave us nothing but truth up there. He nodded to her, a gesture of deep respect. From a technical standpoint, your voice is excellent. You have range, control, and a tone that's both powerful and warm. But honestly, none of that technical analysis matters right now. What matters is that you just changed this room. You changed me, and I'm grateful for that. The audience erupted in applause again. The tough judge, the one who never showed emotion, who never let performances affect him personally, had just admitted that he had been moved to his core. It was unprecedented. People were whispering to each other in amazement, not just about the performance, but about seeing this transformation in a judge they thought they knew. The third judge picked up his microphone. He was older than the other two, with gray hair and the kind of face that showed he had seen a lot in his life. He was known for being thoughtful and kind, but also for giving insightful criticism that helped artists improve. He looked at the woman on stage with an expression that seemed almost paternal. You know, he began, his voice measured and calm. We throw around a lot of words in this business. We talk about star quality and stage presence and the X factor. We're always looking for that special something that sets one performer apart from all the others. He smiled gently. What you have is something beyond all of that. What you have is wisdom earned through pain, strength earned through loss, beauty earned through surviving something that could have destroyed you. He gestured broadly to the audience. Look around this room. Everyone is still affected. People are still crying. That's not because you hit impressive high notes, though you did. It's not because you have a pretty voice, though you do. It's because you connected with something universal. Love, loss, the courage to keep going even when your heart is broken. Every person in this room has experienced some version of what you've been through, or will someday. And you gave them permission to feel it, to acknowledge it, to honor it. He leaned back in his chair, thinking. You said earlier that your husband wanted you to share your voice with the world. I need you to understand something. Your husband was right, but not just in the way you might think. Yes, your voice is beautiful and deserves to be heard. But what the world really needs is your story, your courage, your example of how to face fear and how to honor love even after loss. The woman on stage was crying again, but smiling too. The judge continued. In a world that often feels cynical and disconnected, you just reminded us what really matters. You reminded us that vulnerability isn't weakness, it's the strongest thing we can do. You stood up here in front of all these strangers and you let us see your heart. That's extraordinary. He paused, then delivered his final thought. I've been in the music industry for 40 years. I've worked with famous singers, legendary performers, people whose names everyone knows. And I can tell you without hesitation that what you just did was more meaningful than 90% of what I've seen in those 40 years, because it wasn't about entertainment. It was about healing. You healed something in this room tonight. You healed something in me. The audience was completely silent now, hanging on every word. The judge looked at her with genuine warmth. Your husband told you the world needed to hear your voice, and he was absolutely right. But I think what he really meant was that the world needed to see your courage. And now we have. And we're all better for it. He set down his microphone and the audience exploded into applause once more. All three judges had spoken, and none of them had offered a single piece of criticism. There was nothing to criticize. Technical perfection wasn't the point. The point was that something genuine and profound had happened, and they had all been fortunate enough to witness it. The host approached the judges' table, ready to ask for their official votes. It was a formality at this point. Everyone knew what the answer would be, but the show had its format and they needed to follow it. He spoke into his microphone, addressing all three judges. So, judges, it's time for your decision. Let's start with you, he said, gesturing to the female judge. She didn't hesitate. She pressed the button in front of her that lit up green with the word yes in bold letters. The audience cheered. The second judge pressed his button immediately after. Another yes, more cheers. The third judge pressed his button, completing the unanimous decision. 3 bright green yes votes illuminated on the board behind the judges. But this moment felt different from other unanimous yes votes the show had given out. Those were about talent being recognized. This was about something deeper being acknowledged. The woman on stage, this 42-year-old night shift nurse who had walked on stage to laughter and skepticism, had just received a standing ovation and unanimous approval from judges who looked at her not as a contestant, but as someone who had taught them something valuable about being human. The host walked back to the woman, who was still crying, still smiling, still looking overwhelmed by everything that had just happened. Congratulations, he said warmly. You're moving on to the next round. How does it feel? She tried to speak but couldn't get the words out at first. Finally, through tears, she managed to say, I wish he could have seen this. I wish he could know that I did it. The host put his hand on her shoulder. I think he knows, he said gently. I think somehow he knows. The show aired 3 weeks later on a Tuesday evening. The woman watched it at home with her daughter, sitting on the same couch where she and her husband used to watch television together. She had been nervous about seeing herself on screen, worried that the emotion might be too raw, too personal. But as she watched, she understood why the producers had barely edited her segment. They had let it play out in real time because cutting away would have diminished something important. Within an hour of the show airing, her phone started buzzing. Text messages from friends and family, from co-workers at the hospital, from people she hadn't spoken to in years. Everyone saying the same thing. I saw you, I cried. You were incredible. Her daughter's phone was blowing up too. Friends from school sending messages about how proud they were, how they had cried watching it with their families. But the real phenomenon started online. Someone had recorded the performance on their phone from their television screen and posted it on social media. Within hours, it had thousands of views. By morning, millions. By the end of the week, the video had been watched over 50 million times. It had been shared across every platform, every country, translated into dozens of languages with subtitles. The comments section became a place where people from around the world shared their own stories. A man from Australia wrote about losing his wife to cancer, and how the song had been their song too. A woman from Brazil talked about finally having the courage to pursue her dream of becoming a teacher after watching the performance. A teenager from Japan wrote about how seeing someone face their fear so publicly had inspired them to audition for their school play, something they had been too scared to do. People weren't just watching the video. They were using it as a catalyst for change in their own lives. The phrase, "I'm doing this for you," from her conversation with the host became something of a movement. People would post videos of themselves doing things they had been afraid to do, from singing in public to asking someone out on a date to applying for a new job, always with the caption, "I'm doing this for you," and tagging someone they had lost or someone who believed in them. The woman suddenly found herself thrust into a kind of spotlight she had never anticipated. News outlets wanted to interview her. Morning shows wanted her to come on and talk about her experience. But she was selective about what she accepted. She didn't want to become a celebrity. That had never been the point. But she did agree to some interviews because she realized her story was helping people, and if she could extend that help, she should. During one television interview, the host asked her about the moment her voice cracked during the performance. "Were you embarrassed when that happened?" the host asked. The woman thought about it for a moment, then shook her head. "At the time, I was just feeling it," she explained. "But looking back now, I'm glad it happened, because it proved that I wasn't putting on a performance. I was just being honest about what I was feeling." And I think people responded to that honesty. We're also used to seeing things that are polished and perfect. Sometimes we need to see something real, something that shows it's okay to not have it all together. The interview clip went viral too, with people commenting about how refreshing it was to hear someone embrace their imperfection rather than apologize for it. In a world of filters and carefully curated social media posts, here was someone saying that raw and real was better than perfect and fake. Meanwhile, the talent show continued. She advanced through the next rounds, though none of her subsequent performances quite captured the lightning-in-a-bottle magic of that first audition. How could they? That moment had been born of genuine grief and genuine fear colliding with genuine courage. It was unrepeatable by its very nature. But that was okay. She wasn't trying to recapture that moment. She was just honoring her husband's memory by continuing to sing, continuing to be brave. In the end, she didn't win the competition. She made it to the semifinals before being eliminated, but by then winning or losing didn't matter much. She had already accomplished what she set out to do. She had kept her promise, and in the process she had inspired millions of people around the world. What she didn't expect was how the experience would change the direction of her life. A grief counselor reached out to her, asking if she would be willing to speak at a support group for widows and widowers. She was nervous about it, but she went. Standing in a church basement in front of 30 people who had all lost spouses, she shared her story. She talked about the letter her husband had written, about the fear of stepping back on stage, about how keeping that promise had helped her begin to heal. After she finished speaking, a woman in the back row raised her hand. "I've been coming to this group for 2 years, the woman said, "and I've barely said anything. I just sit here and listen because I didn't think anyone would understand. But listening to you, seeing what you did, it makes me think maybe I can be brave too. Maybe I can try the things my husband wanted me to try." That moment changed everything for the nurse. She realized that her gift wasn't just her voice. Her gift was her story, and the way that story could help others find their own courage. She started speaking at more groups. Grief support meetings, cancer patient support groups, workshops for people dealing with anxiety and fear. Anywhere people were struggling to move forward after loss or to overcome fears that were holding them back. She didn't quit her job at the hospital. That work was too important to her, too much a part of who she was. But she started working 3 nights a week instead of 5, using the other time to do this new work that had found her, or maybe that she had found. It was hard to tell which. She also started singing again, but not for competitions or fame. She began volunteering at hospice centers, singing for patients in their final days and for the families keeping vigil. She sang at memorial services for people she had never met, her voice offering comfort to strangers in their darkest moments. She sang at weddings too, celebrating love, beginning while carrying in her heart the love she had lost. There was something powerful about that duality, about holding grief and joy simultaneously. Her daughter watched all of this with a mixture of pride and amazement. She had submitted that audition video on a whim, hoping to help her mother heal. She had never imagined it would lead to all of this. "Do you regret that I signed you up?" she asked her mother one day. They were sitting in the kitchen, the same kitchen where her mother used to sing while cooking, the same place where so many memories lived. Her mother smiled and squeezed her daughter's hand. "I was so angry at you when I first found out," she admitted. "I was terrified, but now I'm grateful. You gave me back something I thought I'd lost forever. Not just my voice, but my belief in myself. You and your father both believed in me before I could believe in myself." 1 year after that first audition aired, the woman received an invitation that surprised her. The show wanted her to come back for a special anniversary episode featuring memorable contestants from the past season. She almost said no. She didn't want to seem like she was trying to recapture past glory, but then she thought about all the messages she still received daily from people telling her how her story had changed their lives. She thought about her husband's letter, and she said yes. When she walked onto that stage again, the audience recognized her immediately. They rose to their feet before she even sang a single note, applauding not for what she was about to do, but for what she had already done, for who she was. She waited for them to sit, smiled at the familiar judges' faces, and prepared to sing again. This time she chose a different song. Not the wedding song. That belonged to that specific moment, that specific grief, that specific promise kept. Instead, she sang a song about hope, about moving forward, about carrying love with you even as you walk into the future. Her voice was just as beautiful as before, but there was something different about her now. The fear was gone. The nervousness was gone. In its place was a quiet confidence, the kind that comes not from arrogance but from self-knowledge. When she finished, the audience gave her another standing ovation, but this one felt different. The first time, they had been moved by her courage in the face of fear, by her vulnerability, by the rawness of new grief. This time they were celebrating her transformation. They were acknowledging that she had taken that moment of courage and built something meaningful from it. She wasn't just the woman who cried on stage anymore. She was the woman who had turned pain into purpose. After the show, she was approached by a young woman, maybe 25 years old, who was waiting nervously by the stage door. "I just wanted to tell you something," the young woman said, her hands shaking slightly. "A year ago, when I saw your first audition, I was planning to drop out of medical school. It was too hard, too stressful, and I didn't think I could do it. But watching you keep that promise to your husband, watching you face your fear even though you were terrified, something clicked for me. I thought, if she can do that, maybe I can push through one more semester." She paused, tears forming in her eyes. "I just graduated last month. I'm going to be a doctor. And I know it sounds silly, but I feel like I owe part of that to you.